Alright, this is Unit 5, Section 6, the last section of this chapter, so be happy. And of the semester even, too, so that's good. Okay, most of this should be review. I mean, pretty much all of it is. It just might look a little different than before. That's okay. The first one is translations. So if you recall, let's go ahead and write down some notes first. Then we can do the problem. If I have an x minus some number in parentheses, then I would be shifting right. Even though it seems like it should go left, but it doesn't. And then, of course, the opposite, if I have x plus some number in parentheses, then I would shift to the left. Okay. If I have plus some number outside of parentheses, I would go up. Whoa, not you. See, I'm thinking ahead. Shift up. If I have, oh man, so I keep thinking of shift. Okay. Minus some number outside of parentheses, I would shift down. So for translations, I can only go left, right, up, or down. That makes sense. So let's look at the problem. If you need to pause and go back and write those, go right ahead. So on here, I'm only shifting left, right, up, and down on these. So on here, I'm only focusing on what's in the parentheses and what is after. So notice right here where I start, I don't have anything. So then over here, I have plus 4. So if I go from 0 to plus 4, I'm adding 4, right? So if I plus 4, or I add 4, adding 4, if I look down here, would be going left. So that would be going left 4. Okay, and then again, I have nothing, nothing's right here at the end after x, and now I have a plus 1. So if I go from 0 to plus 1, that's adding 1. Of course, adding 1 on the outside of the parentheses would be going up 1. So if you wanted to write this out, you can just say left 4, up 1, and that's my answer. Okay, next one. Same thing. I don't have any parentheses, I don't have any numbers after x, so I'm starting from 0. And from 0, now I subtract 3 inside, and I subtract 5 outside. So inside, if I subtract some number, I'm going from 0 to negative 3, so it's minus 3. I would be going subtracting, right, in parentheses, if you look at your notes. Subtracting is going right. So from here, I'd be going right 3. And then minus 5 outside is down 5. So again, you can just write right 3, down 5, and that's my answer. So translations to me are kind of easy. There's not a whole lot to them. I can only go 4 directions, so it's not, not too crazy. Okay, next part is reflections. Okay, this one might be even easier, I don't know. You can only reflect 2 ways. You can reflect over the x or reflect over the y. So if I have, let's say, reflect over x, okay? Or I'm talking about x-axis and y-axis. So to reflect over the x-axis, I would have to have every term changing signs. So every term changes signs when I do this. Okay, and then to reflect over y, so reflect over y, there is a case where you could do both, but I'm not going to do that in here. That's just too much. I just want you to be able to notice one of these, not both together, because that makes it more tricky. But you can do both. So just to reflect over y, I would only have the terms with x change signs. So only terms with x changes signs. So I either have all of them change or just x. So if it's just x, I reflect over y. If it's everything, I reflect over x. Okay? So let's look at these two. Oh my goodness. If it'll scroll up for me. No, see, I can write, but I can't. Okay, here we go. Okay, so number 3. So you got to pay attention very carefully, because these can be a little tricky if you don't pay attention enough. So if I look, I have 3x squared and plus 1, so I need to compare. So if I have 3x squared and then I go to negative 3x squared, my x changes, right? And if I go from plus 1 to minus 1, the 1 also changes. So everything changes signs. Since everything changes signs, I reflect over the x-axis. So if everything changes, it's over the x-axis. If it was just the 3x squared that changed, it'd be over the y. Okay? Now let's look at this one. Same thing. I have negative 1/4 x to the 4th and negative 3, or minus 3, right? Same thing. So I have negative 1/4 x to the 4th, and then I have positive 1/4 x to the 4th. Okay, so x changes signs. Then I have negative 3, or minus 3, but notice I still have minus 3, so that did not change. So because only the x changes, I reflect over the y. So I either have everything change or only x changes. I'm not going to do anything else crazy for y'all, because then it gets complicated and we don't need to do that. You just need to understand the basics right now. So that's reflections. Okay, we have 2 more. We have vertical stretch, and then we'll have vertical compress. Okay, so let's write some notes. It's all vertical stretch or vertical compress. It's both vertical. I'm not doing horizontal simply because it's just the opposite of vertical, and I don't need to confuse anyone. So I'm only doing verticals. That way it kind of makes sense. The horizontals are always opposite anyway. So I stretch if I have some number times my function. But that number, right, the absolute value of that number must be greater than 1. Meaning, if you need to write this down, I ignore the negative or the sign, right? So ignore the negative or ignore the sign, however you want to write that. So when I'm looking at a number being multiplied, if it's negative, that has nothing to do with a stretch or compress. A negative only reflects. And once I have done something, so if a negative reflects, it can't also do something else. It can only do one thing. So that's why I have the absolute value. I'm only looking at the number itself, nothing else. No negative, no positive, that doesn't matter. So let's look at these. Now when you do look at these, I only have to look at one thing. I only have to look at the x or the number afterwards. I don't have to do both. You can, but you don't have to. So I can choose to look at the negative 2x cubed and the negative 6x cubed, or I can choose to look at 3 and 9. Either way is fine. So if I start at 3, what do I multiply to get 9? I multiply by 3, right? So that's times 3. Just the same, if I start with, negative 2, and I get to negative 6, what did I multiply by? I multiplied by 3. It should be the same, right? Because if you multiply by a whole function, every number has to change by the same amount. So it doesn't matter which one you look at. But notice they're both times 3, so the answer that I would write would be stretch by 3. Okay, and that's my answer. Now, of course, on the homework and the practice and then the quiz and all that stuff, you're going to have a mix of these together. But by focusing on just one thing at a time, you'll be able to get these a lot easier. So when you do have the ones that are all mixed up and stuff is multiple, right? I wouldn't try and do everything at once. It's too hard. Do one thing at a time. Because remember, every change can only do one thing. It can't do 2 or 3 things. That is not possible. Okay, so here, I can go from 1/3 to 2/3. And you might think, fractions? I don't want to deal with fractions. Okay, that's fine. We can go from -4 to -8. So from -4 to -8, what did I multiply by? I did times 2. Of course, if you notice on the fractions, because the denominator, the 3 did not change, but the top did, from 1 to 2 is times 2. So look, it's the same thing. But if you don't like fractions, that's totally fine. I get it. Do the whole numbers. They are easier. Okay, I'll admit that. They're easier. So because I multiplied by 2 to go from the first one to the second one, I stretch by 2. Okay? And that's my answer for that one. So that's vertical stretch. The last one is vertical compress. So notes real quick. I'm going to compress if I have some number times my whole function, right? But that number is less than 1. And again, you can write ignore the negative, because the negative doesn't matter. Wow, that's a weird R. So if I ignore the negatives on these, remember the negatives can only reflect, they cannot stretch or compress. So when I say if it's less than 1, a -5 is technically a -5 by itself is less than 1, but for functions, the negative reflects, the 5 makes it stretch. So you have to separate those. Okay, so be careful. So let's look at these. Now I'm going from -2 to -2/3, and you're like, fractions again, I don't want to do that. All right, cool. We don't have to. We have from 3 to 1. Notice my number gets smaller, so I'm not multiplying. So automatically that should tell you that I'm compressing. If your number gets bigger, then you're stretching. If it gets smaller, you're compressing. That only makes sense, right? So if I'm compressing, I can go ahead and write compress. I know I'm compressing. I just got to know by how much. So to get from 3 to 1, what did I divide by? I divided by 3. But I don't say I compress by 3, right? Well, I guess you could. Yeah, that would work. We can do that. Technically, that's really what it is. Okay, so because I'm dividing, I'm going from 3 to 1. I'm dividing by 3, so I compress by 3. And the same thing if I look at my 2. Notice how it's 2 divided by 3. That's actually what I did, right? I just divided 2 by 3, which doesn't reduce. That's why it's a fraction. So fractions aren't that bad, but I divided by 3, and that's it. So last one. So I go from 1/4 to 1/8. Again, you're like, fractions, no thanks, next. All right, cool. -4 to -2. I divided by, because I'm getting smaller, right? 4 to 2, I divided by 2. Therefore, I compressed by 2. That's exactly how it's going to be on the homework. That's how it's going to be on the quiz and on the test. And if you have to take the final exam, the semester exam, it'll be like that on there too. So if my number gets smaller, it's compressed. If it gets bigger, it's stretched. Then you just got to figure out what you're multiplying or dividing by to get there, from the first one to the second one. And so hopefully that was mostly review, and that's it for the notes.